Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Yeah, that's me. Thank you for listening on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, wherever you podcast. Giving you all those options to catch out this 5-day-a-week venture into what's in my head as we watch a 2024 political cycle swirl the drain. So I got to thinking about this, and this epiphany hit me. I've been through what I'm going through now so many times in my past incarnation. By that I mean getting Tuesday's primary election results and trying to figure out what to make of it and where we go from here is no different than when I used to work in radio broadcasting and we'd get our twice-a-year report cards from the ratings service. And it would give us results that weren't always ironclad, weren't always clear-cut. The message wasn't always clear. I say that because, let me try and set this up for you. I worked in mostly smaller markets the last few years in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, the last 11 years or so. Also working in New Orleans and Atlanta, so some big markets, but also some super small markets. And you know what? The funny thing is, it doesn't even really matter the market size because the muddled messaging is pretty much the same with radio ratings services. In the smaller markets, they literally send out little pamphlets, little diaries to a few hundred people and say, hey, do us a favor for a couple weeks, keep track of what radio stations you listen to. So you're at the mercy of people who might get $5 for doing this, I think, maybe, to keep tabs, like good, solid diarization, literally like minute to minute what they did as far as listening to radio goes for 2 weeks. We were literally at the mercy of that. Our advertising dollars depended on that information, as fallible as it was. So we'd get the results, and we'd look at the results, and they could swing wildly from one direction to the other. It's like, the last time we got this 6 months ago, a lot of people liked country radio, and now everybody likes pop radio or news talk. It would swing wildly, and we'd have to read into it and try and take, like, in my mind as a radio programmer, I used to just take the last 5 of those surveys and sort of throw it all together and come out with a trend. When you got to the larger markets, this is quirky stuff, y'all. In the larger markets, like New Orleans, like Atlanta, they don't ask people to fill out a diary because they don't trust people. The same company that trusts the people in the smaller markets with the writing down of what radio stations they listen to and at what times and blah, 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 blah. They don't trust people in the larger cities because they don't trust people, period. Anyway, they give you little pager-like devices. This is so antiquated. Pager-like devices that you have to wear on your person that keeps tabs by listening to the audio. Keeps tabs of what you're listening to by listening to the audio. And again, it's, several hundred people in a city like Atlanta who can decide for us all what the trend is as far as listening habits when it comes to listening to radio stations. It's 2024. We have mobile devices with apps that can pick up every conversation we have. I can sit here and talk to you about fuzzy little kittens around my mobile phone, and now my feed's going to be eaten up with fuzzy little kitten videos, and I'm for that. I'm so for that. Bring it to me, Siri. Anyway. But the radio ratings folks, they're still stuck in, 1999 with their pager-like devices that keep tabs. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is the data is quirky and in the hands of very few people. And it's hard to read a lot into it. Much like Tuesday's primary results. Very few people, quirky, maybe, very few people weighed in on candidates vying for party nominations to be on the November ballot. Very few people weighed in on one of only 4 contested state Supreme Court races. One candidate had the backing, $500,000 ad buy and all, of the sitting governor, while the other had no major candidate or party, because it's a nonpartisan race, backing him. And so you could say, well, this is a bellwether for 2024 November, that the conservative candidate won by a 55-45 margin. But you can also say, if you're on the left, well, the other guy kind of had one hand tied behind his back and didn't have any major backing like that. And so maybe it's a good thing that the result was as, air quotes, close as it was. See, it's all muddled messaging. And at the end of the day, like radio ratings services, we're left to wonder if this is a trend based on the chiming in of a few hundred people. Okay, so unlike radio rating services, we actually have thousands of folks who participated in Tuesday's primary, but it was still a very subdued, I want to say it was like less than 20%. It was like somewhere in the 15 to 18% from the numbers that I'm seeing. And it's always kind of hard to nail that down because the Secretary of State's office gives us a number of registered voters, but then, they do the purge thing all the time, so you just don't know what the hard number is. But nonetheless, turnout was very light. Here to help me make sense of whatever we can glean from Tuesday's primary results is Andrew Heaton from Sagamore Hill Consulting. Andrew, good morning. I'm sure your sleep patterns are totally screwed up. You, of course, working the campaign trail in one of the races here, and now you're a bit more free to discuss that race and many more, I'm sure. But also, this is kind of a moment for you to sort of pivot, I would think, too. You can let me behind the curtain if you want to on how this works for somebody who is a political consultant and has candidates who may, have been on the losing end, and now maybe you've got some candidates who are looking to pick you up for the general. Does it work like that?
It's a little bit like that. So just to be clear, I had 3 candidates who had active campaigns on Tuesday. One of them, unfortunately, is not going to progress past Tuesday. Mm-hmm. But two of them are in runoffs in DeKalb County. It's a little bit of that. You kind of have to spend some time winding down operations and different things for the candidates who aren't progressing. And then, you've got other candidates who maybe didn't have a super active, because one thing we know in Georgia is we have a ton of candidates who don't face any opposition on primary day. Mm-hmm. And so now is the time when a lot of them that didn't really have to actively campaign during the primary season, now they're starting to look at, okay, I got to start ramping up, getting my operations ready, because the fall is when they really have to get active.
So what, in general, let's just take this from a macro point of view, a zoom out point of view. What in general can Democrats and those on the left glean from Tuesday's results, other than, my God, the turnout was extremely light?
Yeah. And here's what I'll say about Tuesday. And, because I was working on a couple of kind of more local races, I had a couple county races I was working. It's something we've always kind of known, but Tuesday laid bare because of the real unique way that Tuesday played out. Mm-hmm. It is hard in general to get the general electorate interested in local elections.
Yeah. And
this is something that anyone involved in politics, campaigning, or just generally observant knows. It is hard to get folks, and I don't even want to put it on the voters. It's not all their fault. News stations, news coverage,
yep.
As much as we talk about how important local news is, even local news tends to dominate its coverage about the national horse race. Mm-hmm. Because they know that's what gets ratings. They know that's what gets views and clicks on their websites. Mm-hmm. So we get heavy coverage of the presidential. And, here's, to give the AJC, a couple other local, they try their best to give local coverage, but they only have so much time. They only have so many reporters. And so local races don't tend to get as much attention, and thus voters don't tend to realize what's at stake, what's going on. I was talking to voters, and these are people who are themselves, consider themselves politically active. I've seen them at political events, and some of them were even like, "Oh, we've got elections. Oh, I thought we already voted." It's like, well, no, the March primary was just the presidential. And they're like, "Oh, well, What are we voting on Tuesday?" Mm-hmm. And these are people who are politically plugged in. That doesn't even start to talk about your everyday person who, they're focused on their lives. They're focused on putting meals on the table and bringing home an income, and it just doesn't get enough attention. And this primary specifically, because this was one of the first primaries in several cycles where we had nothing statewide on the ballot other than the Supreme Court race, which really did not start to get any steam, attention, what have you, until maybe the last 2.5, 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And that's not enough time to get voters. So for setting that one race aside, you just had nothing statewide or national, federal, what have you, to really get voters' attention. And so without that in the air, a lot of folks just kind of went about their business and did not realize. And it's unfortunate, and we try to talk about this, but it's unfortunate because, yes, the national races are vitally important for our national interests. But for everyday people's lives, there probably is no more important election than who is your county commissioner, who is your mayor, who's your city council, because those are the people that affect your day-to-day lives the most.
Mm-hmm. And you make, I think, a pretty valid point. I was trying to make this point myself. A conservative pundit friend of mine was, kind of gloating a little bit about the Supreme Court results. And I told him, I said, up until a month ago, nobody even knew this was on a ballot, let alone that, that there were choice implications involved. I feel like that, and I'm not blaming John Barrow or his campaign. I mean, the filing period, it wasn't all that long ago either. But yeah, that didn't really seem to become something of any prominence until, like you said, 2-3 weeks ago max. And then you've got one candidate who has major party backing through the governor, essentially, and the other, the party couldn't step in.
Right. Yeah, and I've seen some of the conservative pundits trying to spin this as like, oh, we'll see, just because, choice on the ballot's not always the victory that Democrats have been saying. Well, let's actually look at this race. So first off, yes, Democrats, the Democratic Party of Georgia, other folks, they tried to do their version of making this about choice. And yes, John Barrow definitely would have been a justice who would have had a much kinder view of women's bodily autonomy. But he could not necessarily campaign as a full-throated abortion advocate,
right,
the way a congressperson or a governor or what have you could, because it is a different kind of race. Mm-hmm. So first off, we can't pretend that this was a race run just like other races that have been made about choice, because it wasn't. He did as much as he could, given the strictures that are put on a judicial nominee. Mm. Secondly, that's exactly right. You had one nominee who was doing his best to try to bring attention to the race, but wasn't getting necessarily a ton of support until the very end. Another, not the incumbent, and let's also make that very clear. This was also a Democratic nominee versus an incumbent. Mm-hmm. And we often talk about the power of incumbency, and we saw that up and down the ballot again on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. If you had an I next to your name, man, you other than one or two instances, you had a great Tuesday, regardless of what kind of race you ran. You had a great day, because that I is the most powerful thing in politics, especially when it comes to time to vote. And especially in judicial races, because the reality is the everyday voter doesn't necessarily know a lot about what to look for in a judicial race. Nope. And what to look for. And there's not a ton of information about judicial nominees. So if they see an I next to a judge's name, unless they have heard recently of some crazy scandal, which just doesn't ever really happen with judges, 99.99% of the time, they're just going to vote for the judge with the I. And that's why you saw, it just that race was not what some of the conservative pundits are trying to spin it to. That was always, it was going to be an uphill sludge regardless, because of all those factors. So I as much as they want to extrapolate a lot of things out of that, I think they should probably temper their expectations of how that might play out in other races.
And to that point, Douglas County probate judge Christina Peterson, she lost within the Democratic primary while dealing with 30 ethics charges. So the point is easily made there that if you're an incumbent, especially if you're a judge and you don't have a ton of bad press going for you, chances are you're going to get the rubber stamp approval. We're with Andrew Heaton from Sagamore Hill Consulting discussing the results of Tuesday's primary. More of that conversation when the Ron Show returns on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. Log on at RonShowATL.com for show notes, past episodes, or if you'd like to make a little donation to PayPal to kind of help keep this show going, because it's an out-of-pocket expense for me, by all means, RonShowATL.com. We're with Andrew Heaton, Sagamore Hill Consulting. I want to drill in a little bit on some of the three losses that were statewide there. You had Lauren Daniels losing in Locust Grove, and good riddance, maggot to the hilt. But then again, it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't, so we don't know what to expect from the person who toppled her. But Terry Anulowitz, Representative Terry Anulowitz, very nice lady. I think she's served her constituents pretty well in Smyrna. She lost to a Democratic socialist and someone who has been an activist in the Stop Cop City movement. Is there anything to glean from Gabriel Sanchez toppling Anulowitz there? You know, I've worried a little bit in the last, 12 months or so, that the Cop City movement, you see the pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses, and the party sort of just not really giving a whole lot of attention or any enthusiasm behind either of those movements that could come back to backfire in some respects as this cycle continues. Do you feel any of that, or is this just a one-off?
I think in that race, it's a bit of a one-off, and here's what I'll say about that. Now, I didn't spend a ton of time trying to research what Gabriel Sanchez's literature looked like, what his canvassing materials look like. So I don't know what he was telling and his canvassers were telling voters about him, other than he was a Democrat on the ballot to be their next House rep. What I will say is, I think this was a case of you had a super young candidate who had a kind of mini army of motivated canvassers sweeping through the district, more than probably any incumbent nominee in the state, in terms of, because right now what a lot of candidates are finding it, because of the general kind of malaise and unenthusiasm right now for this election, it's hard to find canvassers and volunteers.
Yes, it is.
Unless you are a candidate who has a group who are already motivated about something else and want to find a victory. So the analogy I is a little bit here is think about AOC's first surprise victory. That was powered by, she had an army of her fellow, at that time she was active with her local DSA chapter. She was active with a lot of progressive political groups, and they were on the ground canvassing, getting the word out about her against an incumbent who, was doing what they had normally done, but weren't ready for that. Their opponent was doing something very different. Yeah. I think, and I want to be very careful here, because this is not me saying that Terry Anulowitz did not. She did. But I think she got overwhelmed a bit by just how many canvassers Gabriel, from his entire Metro Atlanta connections, were bringing into the district. But do I think Gabriel Sanchez's literature that he was dropping there in Smyrna and in suburban Cobb was heavy on Cop City rhetoric? I doubt it.
No,
I could be wrong. Somebody could show me that literature and I could be wrong, but I doubt it. I think that he motivated his volunteers with that stuff, but he just reached more voters and swamped the district, and it worked.
And we reached out to him. We're going to have him on the show here pretty soon. But when you go through his website and you go through his TikTok account, which, by the way, he has a ton of TikTok followers. Well, I say a ton. Relatively speaking, for a local candidate, 3,500 TikTok followers is a healthy number when you can't find many who have Facebook likes in that number. Right. But when you look at his website, he speaks to housing affordability. That's something that I've said on this show that not enough candidates are talking about. This, to me, is a major campaign issue that nobody's heralding as a major campaign issue. He talks about healthcare affordability. He talks about economic rights and raising the minimum wage and education. These are issues that, like I said, don't get the headlines from candidates that I think they ought to. And again, that's what he leads with. That is at the core, at the forefront of his campaign issues. And I think there's something to be said for speaking to things that, I don't know why. Maybe it's one of those things where when you're the incumbent party from the White House down, you don't want to talk about the things that aren't going quite well, because it kind of looks like you've not done a good job in those realms.
That makes total sense. And you're right. Those are hot button issues that if you're looking to persuade voters to potentially switch horses, which he was trying to do, those are the perfect issues to touch on, because you're right. Every voter, regardless of party, is feeling the impact of housing affordability. That's something that my candidates in DeKalb have talked a lot about is housing affordability and the lack, just not even the cost of housing, but also the lack of it. We don't have enough housing and healthcare costs. I mean, yeah, those are great points. And I think it's a little different in a state race because here in Georgia, they are not the majority party.
Yeah.
You can play the angle of like, send me to the Gold Dome because I'm going to fight for these things that the majority party isn't going to do anything about. And especially healthcare. Like that, like if you are a state house, state senate, any kind of candidate in Georgia right now, and you're not banging the drum on Medicaid expansion, on the lack of advance in healthcare costs in Georgia, on the mealy-mouthed approach that's come out of the governor's office the last couple of years, and that the major parties just trying to kind of wave their hands and excuse off, as well as everyday economic issues, you've got to be doing it because here specifically in Georgia, like we are not the majority. So we can say, hey, give us a chance because what's happening right now from the majority isn't working.
Call or text The Ron Show anytime at 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
We're with Andrew Heaton from Sagamore Hill Consulting. Kind of recalibrating a little bit after the Tuesday Georgia primary situation. Not much. It's hard to glean a whole lot from that as it relates to the November 2024 cycle. But as we mentioned before, local media, national media, not a lot of attention to local races or anything that's not Biden-Trump. So everybody wants to know, well, what does this mean for the Biden-Trump race and the polls and the way they look? The swing state polls, they're all not looking very good right now for the incumbent. And I know in your capacity, folks like to say, well, folks don't really get serious about the presidential until 90 days out. Does that still hold, or this feels just like a totally different cycle for me? I feel like folks have kind of already made up their mind, and there's not going to be a whole lot that's going to sway anybody, even guilty convictions, if that's what people are waiting on.
Yeah. What's so difficult about this race is we have not seen a race like this in any of our lifetimes. I mean, unless you are gifted by God to have been born when, Grover Cleveland was attempting to make a comeback against Benjamin Harrison. This is just not a race that we have really seen. And but I think to try to wave off and yes, you're right. And it is true. A lot of folks are not really going to start really tuning in until the fall, until after Labor Day. And the parties know this, and they're trying to combat this by the fact that, they are proposing doing the first presidential debate in June, right here in the A, right here in the A. But they're doing it, this is unprecedented to do a presidential debate this early, but it's because both parties realize that, man, we have an issue right now. People are not enthused about this election. We've got to start doing something to get them interested, get their attention. And also some of that is just the changing dynamics of how we vote now. That 90-day thing made a lot of sense when you literally had 1 day to vote. But we don't have 1 day to vote anymore. You're voting for a month. Like there's not an election day anymore. You have an election month with advance voting. And so the parties know they can't wait until after Labor Day because people are going to start early voting in October. Like so they are trying their damnedest to do anything they can to start getting people to pay attention now. But yeah, I mean, I think because we even saw it, yes, turnout on this Tuesday was very low. And it started out low and it never really picked up. But even just looking at the presidential primary, the turnout wasn't a whole lot better. And that was the race we keep talking about. And so the reality is I think both parties are very much facing a situation where they can't predict what turnout's going to look like. They know it's not going to be 2020 turnout by any stretch of the imagination, especially here in Georgia. You're not going to have 2020 turnout. And we're not even 100% sure. Again, I'm just going to talk about here in Georgia. I don't even know if we'll see 2022 turnout. Now, that wasn't a presidential year, but here in Georgia, you did have Stacey Abrams on the ballot for the Democrats. You had Brian Kemp, you had Herschel Walker, you had Raphael Warnock. You had these names that brought people to the polls, that they wanted to, like, they were excited, whichever side you were on, you were excited to come out to the polls and make sure that person won. Well, after Trump and Biden, there's nothing else going to be on the ballot in Georgia that's necessarily going to jazz people up. And right now, the reality is those two candidates are not, and I'm not saying that's correct. And this is a separate conversation one from, do I think the president has earned attention and has earned the right to have people come back out and reelected? It's a different conversation. I'm just talking about the enthusiasm for the election in general. And the reality is it feels like a rerun that people don't want to watch.
It's so true. So I guess one question I have is, since we don't expect 2022 numbers, we obviously aren't going to get 2020 numbers, which I think were aided by, drop boxes and, because of the pandemic, we made it easier for folks to vote, and fathom the idea. If we're not going to see those sort of numbers, we already know the sort of tapering off that the left can expect because of, again, Cop City, Israel, Palestine. There are just disaffected voters, and I think on the young end, it's really gonna be painful. What are the Republicans expecting as far as any sort of drop off in enthusiasm? Is there a Trump lethargy factor over there as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and here's what you need to look at when you look at that. And yes, their national pundits are trying to wave it off like, nope, the entire party is rallied around President Trump and we're ready to come back out. And my question would be, if that's true, how is a candidate in the name and body of Nikki Haley, how did she continue to rack up 20 and 30% in some states weeks and months after she dropped out?
True.
She did that because there is still a large percentage, could be 10%, could be upwards of 25, 30% of the GOP based voters that don't want Trump again. They don't, and they were desperate for anybody else. And yes, many of those voters will probably suck it up and just do what they feel they got to do because they believe in the overall GOP principles, and they will explain it to themselves just like they did in 2016, because these are a lot of the same voters who swallowed, held their nose, made the big gulp and went inside and voted for Trump because they have things that are priorities for them that they thought, regardless of who he is and his character, he'd get done. And in many ways, they were rewarded because really what we're talking about is the Supreme Court. Yeah. And those voters got exactly what they wanted in that sense. Well, the difference now is, they've already got it. They've got their Supreme Court because other than maybe one or two of the justices who may retire or something over the next 4 years, like they're going to have their majority for a decade plus. So that's not going to be as much of a motivating factor. They've won legislatively on abortion. So they won. So you don't have that motivating them like it was in 2016. So now you're going to ask them like, okay, well, so, why would what's motivating me? I don't like this man. I don't like what he's done to my party. I mean, let's put it full bare. These are Jeff Duncan Republicans.
Yeah, but there's 18 of those? I don't know. I don't feel like that's that strong of a contingent.
But that's what I'm saying. Is it 18 or is it those 20, 30% that voted for Nikki Haley in Indiana months after? All of those Nikki Haley voters in Georgia. That's the GOP would love you to believe, the state leaders here would love you to believe that Jeff Duncan Republicans are a handful. And what my argument is like, it is not a handful. Okay. I have them in my own family. Now they don't live in Georgia, so they're not Jeff Duncan Republicans, but I have them in my own family, lifetime Republicans who have now found Donald Trump so abhorrent that they're either going to vote for Biden or they're going to stay home. But there's not a day on this planet they would consider voting for Donald Trump. And there are enough of those Republicans that they have the same turnout concerns we have. It's just for different factors. But yes, they absolutely have turnout fears that they're trying to combat right now.
Fascinating. All right, well, we'll watch this all unfold. Thank you so much, Andrew Heaton, Sagamore Hill Consulting. Go get some rest, and then let's get into the general election fervor that we know you've got deep down in your belly ready to come out storming with.
All right, brother.
Get this. When we come back, we'll discuss how I got unfriended by someone because I'm not pro-woman enough. But I literally agree with the entire dais of The View. Hear me out. The Ron Show back in just a sec. So I tell y'all all the time you can find me on all your social media platforms. Well, I say almost. I'm not on TikTok. I'm just not because, I have a personal TikTok, but I'm not investing in creating other TikToks if the thing's going to be banned soon anyway. But anyway, at Ron Show ATL, Facebook, Twitter, X platform, Instagram, Threads. I don't give out my personal Facebook account, either to my real estate clients. By the way, that is at Ron on the Real if you want to dive into that. Metro Atlanta Real Estate. Looking to buy or sell a home? Need to relocate? I can help you at Ron on the Real. Anyway, I don't give out my personal Facebook account because, honestly, I like the fact that I've sort of curated my little friend bubble. And not to brag, but I do have like 2,800 friends. It could have been like 5,000, but over the years in radio, that sounds stupid. I don't even want to say it could have been 5,000, but it could have been a lot more than that because over the years working in radio, you get friend requests from people you don't know, and that's literally just not what I want. I don't want my social media, my personal social media, to be inundated with people that I don't know. You find me and we have a common connection. Hey, maybe it'll happen. Anyway, a couple of days ago, I just kind of got tired of all the Harrison Butker oxygen being just sucked out of the social media sphere. And here's exactly what I posted. And I've gotten some brushback for this from those on the left. Oh my God, y'all, stop obsessing over Harrison Butker. Continuing to howl for his head only amplifies a speech he gave to 450 graduates at a tiny college in Kansas. The league, the NFL, ain't finding him. The Chiefs, they're not cutting him. And hell no, he's not getting endorsement offers from Nike. Where are y'all getting this from? I happen to believe that a lot of the stuff that people are seeing on social media is being generated probably from Putin's social media sweatshops, China. These aren't real websites or social media accounts. You'll if you go to look at some of these social media accounts that are sharing the Harrison Butker memes, the outrage triggers, you'll come to find that these pages have only existed for weeks, if not days. We saw this in 2016. We saw this happen from murky, shady websites and social media accounts. We're getting sucked in to divide each other, and our eye is being taken off the ball. And that's exactly what this post is all about. I continued. Listen, he's a field goal kicker. Hell, he might be the only one of y'all left and right can even name. He might be, by the way, the 42nd, 43rd most important player on the 55-man roster. And here we are obsessing over him, okay? He barely affects a game, and yet he's grabbing all the oxygen in the room when the very rights he's okay with seeing limited are under attack by politicians and their media allies, all too eager to let us turn Butker into the next Kyle Rittenhouse. Remember him? Let it go. Or at least understand he and his speech is a distraction from what should matter more to us. He's clearly not watched The Handmaid's Tale, while the rest of us clearly have. Yeah, it's oogie what he said, but it ain't like he got caught on a hot mic confessing to grabbing women by their genitals and forcing his kisses on them. Cut that guy from the team. I'm catching hell for this because one woman in particular, I'm not letting this go. Okay. But we just had an opportunity here in the state of Georgia to weigh in on a woman's right to choose. And I get it. There are factors involved in that. Nobody votes in judicial races. Primary turnout was like less than 18%. And the candidate who was pro-choice barely got to say he was, and he didn't have the party's backing, while the other guy did have the governor's backing and a $500,000. I get it. No, I mean, but y'all, if you want to affect change, worrying about what one uber radically conservative Catholic, a minority in Catholicism, by the way, American Catholicism at that, worrying what one guy said at a small private college, all you're doing is amplifying him. Just sharing the video, you're just amplifying him. He's gotten way more of an audience than he deigned to get. If we'd have just said, oh, that's crazy. Hey, how about ... What's going on politically? What's showing up on your ballot? Someone who, by the way, I was Facebook friends with, named Patience, ironically, who I don't think I had actually ever met, now that I think about it. So here I go. Like, maybe I just need to be better at figuring out who I need to be friends with on social media. Just wouldn't let it go. She has lambasted me. I'm not for women because I'm not freaking out about Harrison Butker. He's not running for anything, and his views aren't even espoused by the majority of Catholics in America, let alone, I dare say, not even a majority of conservatives in America. Otherwise, we wouldn't have women running for office on the GOP ticket, right? Because they'd be at home making babies and tending to the house. And then I found this clip from The View, who went on the subject for one day and has moved the hell on because there are bigger issues every day in our society. Whoopi Goldberg.
So, listen, I like when people say what they need to say. He's at a Catholic college.
Yeah.
He's a staunch Catholic. These are his beliefs, and he's welcome to them. I don't have to believe him.
Right.
I don't have to accept them. The ladies that were sitting in that audience do not have to accept him. The same way we want respect when Colin Kaepernick takes a knee.
Right.
We want to give respect to people whose ideas are different from ours, because the man who says he wants to be president, you know who?
Yeah.
He says the way to act is to take away people's right to say how they feel. We don't want to be that. We don't want to be those people. So I'm okay with him saying whatever he says, and the women who are sitting there, if they take his advice, good for them, they'll be happy. If they don't, good for them, they'll be happy a different way. Well, that's my attitude.
So I agree with you, and I disagree with you.
That's okay.
I agree with you that freedom, in the spirit of freedom of speech, I don't want people shut down or fired for things they're willing to say.
By the way, that is Sarah Haynes of The View.
Break with you on the comparison to Colin Kaepernick for this reason. Colin Kaepernick was standing up for the rights of many and saying in a social justice moment, this is a reminder that we're not there yet. What this man is doing is not just a devout Catholic. This is someone who's practicing something called the traditional Latin Mass, which is divergent from the majority of Catholics. It's compared to being cult-like and extremist like some religions in the Middle East and Asia. So this is a very extreme religion, and what bothers me about that as a Christian is that when people abuse Christianity, they often not only cherry pick from the Bible, they misinterpret and lie by omission, by taking out parts that would have explained something a little better. So what I can say to him as a Christian is if you're using this to oppress a people or hold them down, you're not walking with Jesus. If you are using the religion, if you are more obsessed with the religious rituals and practices than you are with the word of Jesus, you're not walking with Jesus. And if you're using it for the judgment of others and as a weapon to beat people down, you're also not walking with Jesus. So I would really encourage him to find the best parts of faith and not diverge into extremist beliefs.
If this is
Jon Stewart on Monday night on The Daily Show with a reminder to those on the left and the center and the right that the cancel culture thing isn't just something that has been used on the left. It's been used on the right against the right, too.
It is absolutely true that in our modern social media-driven society, our interactions are incentivized and monetized for outrage. And it is f***ing exhausting for everyone. But contrary to your conservative book industry, the outrage isn't just coming from the left. It's coming from the left, the right, for the left, and the Swifties and YA readers, and anybody who dares to lift their head up to say f***ing anything. We are not censored or silenced. We are surrounded by and inundated with more speech than has ever existed in the history of communication. And it is all weaponized by professional outrage hunters of all stripes, scouring the globe for graduation speech snippets, offhand comments during promotional tours, out-of-context comedy bits, lame marketing ideas, or any words and phrases they believe they can latch onto to generate monetized clicks. Outrage is the engine of our modern media economy. And sometimes someone loses a job or something else happens like that that should never f***ing happen. But contrary to conservatives' victimization complex, there is no organized cancel culture conspiracy where even the slightest misstep can 100% get someone on the right canceled. Oh, there is one.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney gets kicked out of Wyoming's Republican Party for opposing Trump.
Yeah. As irony would have it, It turns out that when it comes to cancel culture, the ones who smelt it, dealt it. There is someone canceling people on the right.
Yeah.
But the only one canceling people on the right is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And anyone who dares speak out against him. Refuse to buy into Trump's stolen election claims, and you'll lose your job like Liz Cheney or countless others. In fact, everything the right says cancel culture does to them is actually being done by MAGA. For example.
They will shout you down and try to shut you down as opposed to discuss with you.
Yes, the woke mob shouts you down. And what happens when you're a Republican and dare criticize the boy king?
That is a failure of leadership. And you can boo all you want.
Chris Christie.
But here's the thing.
Donald Trump is running to stay out of prison. And if we elect... I know.
Now, you know me as a person who says what he thinks, and I don't hide the fact that I wasn't a fan of our last president's character issues.
Mitt Romney.
And I'm also no fan.
Show some damn respect, Romney, you piece of shit, motherfucker! It's called class. Like I was telling your mother last night. Hickory dickory doorman.
Right.
Your mom was f***ing a mole man.
I don't know about that.
What's another? Oh, they like the poetry. By the way, what's another thing that the right hates about woke cancel culture?
Many Americans feel forced to stay silent for fear of upsetting the cancel culture mob.
Yes, under cancel culture, you can only speak your truths in private while denying them in public. For instance, this poor young fella,
Tucker Carlson,
who privately wrote of Trump, he's a demonic force, a destroyer. I hate him passionately. He wrote in private. But of course, in public, fearing the cancel mob, he's forced to stand next to his tormentor with what can only be described as the fakest of overlap faces.
Right.
Grab him by the pussy. That's all.
Oh, my God.
But that's cancel culture. It won't let you speak your truth. In fact, it makes you do something even worse.
The left is married to censorship and has nothing else. That's
Dan
how you get people to
Bongino.
believe in an alternate reality.
Yeah, the woke mob is so pernicious, it forces you to deny reality. Like, imagine if Trump ever gave a speech about January 6th, where he clearly confuses Nikki Haley with Nancy Pelosi.
Nikki Haley, did you know they destroyed all of the information, all of the evidence, everything, because of lots of things? Like Nikki Haley is in charge of security. We offered her 10,000 people.
Now, in a healthy discourse, you would just go, hey, man, everybody brain farts sometimes, whatever it is. But under the MAGA cancel culture mob, people like Congresswoman Stefanik have to pretend this was all part of a grand strategy.
That isn't a mix-up. The reality is Nikki Haley.
She wasn't speaker.
Nikki Haley is relying on Democrats, just like Nancy Pelosi, to try to have a desperate showing in New Hampshire.
But he was talking about January 6th.
President Trump has not lost a step. He is a stronger candidate, stronger than he is today, than he was in 2016 and he was in 2020.
He is reverse aging. He is stronger. He is Benjamin Button.
Right.
He will be our wisest baby president. And by the way, denying reality still won't save you. There is no level of loyalty deep enough to be free of Trump cancel culture. Ronna McDaniel literally dropped Romney from her name to keep Trump happy, and he still fired her. And that Romney name had gotten her into all the hottest clubs in Salt Lake City. Yeah, truth is, Trump is the real cancel culture. Emphasis on cult. Because on the right, you can say whatever the you want about gay people and trans people, from TikTok to Patreon. Yep. You can decry DEI from podcasts to, I don't know, the governor's office of Florida. And chances are not only will you be fine, you'll get a raise. But if you ever dare speak out one iota against Donald Trump, be afraid.
Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on America One Radio. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Have a good one.